Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tech Art for All. I'm so glad that you guys are back again, ready for another lesson. Today I'm joined by this cute little furry animal. Her name is Kisia, which literally means kitty in Russian. My, at the time, 3-year-old kid named her Kisia, and the name kind of stuck. She's pretty amazing, and she always wanted to be a tech artist, but she doesn't have the thumbs to type, so it's kind of difficult for her. Okay, bye, Keisha. So like I said before, I'm really happy that you guys are back. Today's lesson 2. I hope you guys are ready to put the thinking caps on and get into it, dive into it. And today we're going to go over um, variables, what they are, what they, how they work inside of Mel. Um, it's not necessary to have programming experience or scripting experience, but if you have it, it certainly will be helpful because of a lot of um, the syntax is similar to other languages, and some of the concepts are the same. And I just wanted to say that, as I mentioned before, I think a lot of people might think that this is difficult, but I believe that anything is easy as long as you have somebody who's teaching you and giving you hints and teaching you the techniques and giving you the right tools along the way. And I think the biggest problem in learning is hitting a stumbling block and not having anybody to rely on or to help out with getting past a certain point. So let's get started. I'm going to show you my desktop view. I already have Maya 2018 open, and I'm going to open up the script editor window. We went over it in lesson 1. It's the icons down here. I'm just going to click on that and bring up the script editor window, and I just opened up mine. There's already a lot of output, so I'm going to clear it by going to edit, and clear history. So that was the output. So in Mel, which is my embedded language, there's several types of variables. There's a few that you use all the time and a few that you use rarely. So let's go over all the variables right now. There is int, um, and it's an integer. And all variables inside of Mel start with a $sign. So I'm going to put $sign. Let's say number, and then every line of code in Mel ends with a semicolon. And once again, to run this line of code, which basically declares or creates a new variable called number of type int. Let me clear that. I'm not sure why that happened. That's kind of strange. Probably some kind of automated event. So I'm going to select int $sign number, and I'm going to hit the narrow enter key that's down on the right by the number pad on your keyboard. Hopefully everybody has it on their keyboard. I'm going to hit enter, and what I did just now is I created a variable called number, and it's of type int. Basically a variable, you can think of it as kind of like a box or a bucket that holds some kind of information. I can now put that information inside of the number variable by typing $sign number equals 5. 5 is an integer, so this should work. So now I ran this code down here that says number $sign number equals 5, and up here it says result 5. So when you see this kind of result thing, it means that Maya interpreted the code and it's telling you that things worked and you got a result. So to double check, we can use the print command. I'm going to type print, and I'm going to give it the variable that I want to print, which is number. Oops. Number. And I run that, and it says up here it prints 5. Okay, so that's great. I can now go back and change number to 6. Run that, and then run print, and now it should print 6. I can also change this to 7 and select both of these lines, and so they will get executed concurrently. So if I run that, you can see that it assigns 7 to number, and right away you could print number, and it already updated to 7. Now, so integers are whole numbers, which includes negative numbers as well. So any number like 7, 0, -10, those are all integers. If you want to enter a number into a variable that has a decimal, that's called a float. So I'm going to create a float variable, which is called number with decimal. Okay, so let's see what happens if I forget the $, because sometimes you forget. So if I select that and hit enter, oh, it says error, float number with decimal, line 1.23, syntax error. So now if I add back the $, there's no error. That means it created the variable. So the great thing about Mel is that it's it's very, very forgiving language. It's very easy to learn. It does a lot of the work for you. There's a lot of other languages that require a lot more code in order to do similar things. But the negative, potentially negative thing is that Mel is a little bit slower because it's compiled when you run the script, whereas other languages or other code could be pre-compiled, which means it will run faster. So it's kind of like a pro and con. On one hand, it's very easy to learn because you don't have to learn how to use a compiler. You just kind of write code and run it, and if you do everything right, it just works. Whereas in other languages, you might have to learn how to use Visual Studio or some other compiler. Let me see. So now let's enter a float into number with decimal. I'm going to put number with decimal. And please forgive me if I make a spelling mistake. That does happen. We'll say 10.2 or 10.52. Let's do that. Hit enter. It says result 10.52. It means once again Maya accepted my line of code, and now we can print number with decimal. Like that, and print, and you can see it returned 10.52, which is what we expected. And I should also note that once you declare a variable, you can't declare it again. So if I try to declare it again, actually it does like it, but I guess I can't declare it as something else. So if I change this to a int, let's try that, it will error out and say like, hey, invalid redeclaration of a variable. So be careful with that. If you're kind of like quickly prototyping something and then you like the name of a variable but you made it an int and you wanted it to be a float, you might have to deal with it. I mean, there's ways to get around it, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. So let's bring that back to float so it's not confusing. Okay, and then also I should mention that in code you can add comments for yourself or for somebody in the future who's reading your code, and it might make it easier for them to understand what you wrote. And the way you do comments is // so you can see that it turns red, and I can say, oh, declaring a int, or here declaring a float. And the cool thing about the comments is that it tells Maya that this is not code, this is just a note. So it's going to completely ignore it. You can even put code in there like int test equals 5 and put a semicolon, but when you run it, it recognizes it as a comment and doesn't do anything specific with it that's the language related. So let me remove that, and then the next widely used variable is called a string. Declaring a string. So I'm adding a comment, so we're going to declare a string. And a string is basically, it could be a letter, it could be a word. It's a string of characters, that's why it's called a string. And then you do string. This is a word. And I'm going to put tech art for all. Or I can have spaces. Let's add spaces. A space is considered to be a character as well. So I click that, and notice what I'm doing here. I'm actually declaring the variable and populating it with contents in one line. You can actually do that. So now the result is I've created a variable called a string variable called this is a word, and I assigned it the string tech art for all. So now if I print it, this is a word. There you go. It returned this tech art for all, which is exactly what we expected. Now the other two variables that I won't go over right now, but I want you to know that they exist, are vectors and matrix. So those guys exist, and they exist for mathematical operations that I'll teach you how to do in more advanced or later on courses. But just know that they exist, and just gotta put it away in your mind for later. So really quickly, I just wanted to show you how simple Mel scripting is in a sense. Most of your Mel scripts consist of these variables and if statements and loops. So you use the if statements to determine if something is true or something has occurred or something is not true, and you use the loops in order to iterate through a bunch of things. For example, if you want to iterate through all the vertices in a mesh, you would loop through those mesh. And in a second lesson or next lesson, I'll show you how to do that. So the complicated part is knowing how Maya works, knowing what commands are available and how to use them. And then the other part is being creative and finding ways to do an operation that you want to do, and how to use these if statements and loops together to write the final script. And of course, you need to know a little bit of math in the beginning, and then depending on how advanced you get, you may need to know more complicated math and more complicated concepts. So this is the lesson where I talk about the variables. Thank you again for joining me, and have a wonderful day, and come back for the next lesson. Thank you.